بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers today, As-Subah Academy, in their new venue, which they just opened a few weeks ago. And they've tried to organize this event to get the recognition in the locality. And hopefully this will be the beginning of further programs like this, as well as their day programs that they have 7 days a week. Alhamdulillah, you have already heard 2 lectures to date, one about the background to Imam Abu Hanifa. I do believe Mufti Abdul Rahman Mangerasar gave the first lecture. And on my left, Mufti Zamilur Rahman, he gave a wonderful talk on the structure and development of the madhab. And I've been assigned to talk about the issue of the Hanafi schools linked to Sunni Orthodoxy. So this is about the issue of creed, about Aqidah, and the contribution of Imam al-Azim Abu Hanifa and his direct students and those who came after him and those who came historically and their contributions. So we want to mention some history behind this issue of how is the Hanafi school linked to Sunni Orthodoxy. And by Sunni Orthodoxy we mean normative Islam, true Islam, which has got no accretions and deliberate misinterpretations applied to it throughout the ages, and which is known as the Firqatul Najiyah, the safe sect, according to the interpretation of some of the hadiths to do with divisions that would arise within the Ummah. So I'm going to mention something about Imam Abu Hanifa and his contribution. I'm not going to talk about his fiqh contribution. You've heard that already from the previous speaker. And maybe after me, Maulana here on my left-hand side, Maulana Yasir Sahib will mention some other points, inshallah, to do with Imam Abu Hanifa and his fiqh and objections against Imam Abu Hanifa and his fiqh and so on. So in the limited time that I have, I'm going to talk about this issue of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, and his school and their contributions to Sunni Aqidah. So Imam Abu Hanifa, by now, I'm sure everyone has come to recognize that he himself was an outstanding scholar of Islamic jurisprudence, what we call fiqh. And he reached the level of being what's known as an absolute mujtahid. What we say in Arabic, mujtahid mutlaq. And as such, he was extensively known to have been groundbreaking as a jurist of faqih. And we've heard that from the previous speaker as well, and evidence was provided. And his impact was very long lasting, and we feel the effects to this day throughout the Muslim world and parts of the non-Muslim world as well. Especially wherever, especially people from the Indian subcontinent have gone, they have promulgated, they have spread the teachings of the Hanafi school. It's fiqh primarily, and the true understanding of Aqidah as espoused by Imam Abu Hanifa and those who imitated his way truly. Because some people, they followed the jurisprudence of Abu Hanifa, but they didn't have the true creed of Imam Abu Hanifa. This distinction needs to be made as well. So we have some false claimants to the way of Abu Hanifa as well. Historically I'm talking about, not just today, even today we have false claimants to the way of Abu Hanifa. I'm not talking about fiqh, in Aqidah as well. Historically, some people from the Mu'tazilite sect, they said that they were Hanafi in fiqh and misinterpreted the creed of Abu Hanifa and tried to promote their understanding of what Abu Hanifa's creed was in the name of their own sect, meaning like the Mu'tazilite sect. So Imam Abu Hanifa's influence cannot be restricted to the domain of Islamic law, as I've just said, but he had a broad view of theological questions. We're talking about creedal questions, Aqidah-related issues, and the various articles of faith, meaning Iman. I'm sure everyone is familiar with what is Iman, the 6 fundamentals of Iman, and more than that. So Imam Abu Hanifa, we can say he had a broad approach and a broad understanding of creed. And we can break it down to 3 arenas as well. 3 fancy terms we can bring in. Soteriology, they say. Okay, soteriology means the doctrine of salvation. Things that we have to affirm that will lead us to paradise in the hereafter. Then Imam Abu Hanifa had a broad understanding of heresiology, meaning the deviant sects that had arose in his time or slightly before his time. Their beliefs, their practices, their methodologies, and he tackled them as well directly. And he spoke against certain individuals by name as well, when there was a need to do so. And we can say that thirdly, he knew about what's called eschatology. Things that will occur before the last hour is established and matters that will occur in the hereafter. So all of this is connected to creedal matters, Aqidah related matters. In formulating his views on these topics, Imam Abu Hanifa, he has laid down two ways that we have attained through the centuries. One, we've just said the Hanafi School of Law, so I'm not going to talk about the Hanafi School of Law per se, that's been done already. But we're going to talk about the Hanafi theological tradition, or creedal matters. What I've said already is Aqidah, or the plural Aqa'id. So we may focus our attention on three broad stages of the development of the creedal aspects of the Hanafi school. First and foremost, the formation of the Hanafi theological tradition, it sprung in which city? Kufa. The previous speaker mentioned Kufa. Kufa being in Iraq, and this is a city which is the seat of the Khalifa in the time of the fourth Khalif, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And those other companions who accompanied him, we've heard already today, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and his students, Al-Qama and Al-Aswad and so on. And the teachers of Abu Hanifa you've heard as well today, like Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman's teacher Ibrahim ibn Nakhai. We heard about Sha'abi before my lecture. So yes, in Iraq, and it spread after, in a northeasterly direction we can say, towards where? Northeastern Iran, which is a Farsi speaking territory, that's called Khurasan traditionally. Central Asia and beyond, which took place during the late 2nd and early part of the 3rd century and onwards. So this area I will mention soon. And secondly, the intellectual transformation of this tradition due to the well-known Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So Imam Abu Hanifa laid down the matter of creed, and then it was spread by his students with what's known as chains of transmission, the Isnad system, until it reached this area that I'm talking about, Central Asia, specifically a place called Samarkand, a city called Samarkand. I'm sure everyone's heard of Imam al-Bukhari. He was from that territory as well. This country is called Uzbekistan in these days. He's buried there, Imam al-Bukhari. But that territory is dominated by the Hanafi school, who Imam al-Maturidi died 333 after the Hijrah, who expounded and he formulated Hanafi theology, matters to do with creed. By what? Defending it against the assertions of various deviant theological sects, such as I've said, the Mu'tazilites. Imam Abu Hanifa, in his time there were deviant sects like the Mu'tazilites, the Qadariyah, the Jabariyah, the Shia, all in Iraq, broadly in Iraq, in Kufa, in Baghdad and Basra, the southern city. Then we can mention the third stage, the emergence of the Maturidi school as a recognized school linked to Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So we're talking about the codification stage. After Imam Abu Hanifa, we've heard from the previous speaker, the codifier of the early Hanafi school was who? Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, died about 189 after the Hijrah. We heard about his magnanimous work, Kitab al-Asl. So later on, the creed of Abu Hanifa had to be codified, let's say. This is what we can say canonization. Just like the 6 books of Hadith, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Ibn Majah. Why are these books the most famous and given most recognition? There's a process of recognition given to these books called canonization. So there was a process where the Aqidah of Imam Abu Hanifa and his students had to be properly codified, written down, so that other people couldn't pass up the Hanafi madhab or the Hanafi theological tradition in the name of Abu Hanifa, without definite link and proof back to the masters, like Abu Hanifa and his students. So other valid schools we have heard of, some of us have heard of, in the time of al-Maturidi was the school of al-Ash'ari, Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, who belonged to the Mu'tazilite sect. And at that time also, another school we can mention is the Athari school, which is linked to Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. And some people misapply the term Athari or misinterpret the way of the teachings of Imam Ahmed as well, historically I'm talking about, and especially in our time, people ban that term around to say they are following the Athari school. Imam al-Ash'ari himself has mentioned in the beginning of his book, Al-Ibana and Usul al-Diyana, that he follows the way of Ahmed ibn Hanbal. So we can say 2 or 3 schools were linked to Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Some scholars have mentioned 2 and some have mentioned 3, and I'll try and mention some of these quotations later on. So the third stage that I've just spoken about was due to the endeavors of a group of significant transoxanian Aqidah specialists. What is transoxania? In Arabic there is a term that the scholars use, ma wara an-nahr. What's beyond the river Oxus? What is beyond the river Oxus? That part of Central Asia that I was talking about just a few minutes ago, corresponding approximately to modern day Uzbekistan, containing what the most important city is Samarkand, and other nations close to it like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. So this area is called Central Asia. This is where the teachings of Abu Hanifa, I'm talking about the fiqh and the aqa'id, was promulgated, was spread widely, and some prominent scholars arose, not just Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, but others as well, in his time or after his time to spread the true understanding of the creed of Imam Abu Hanifa and his students. So we can mention some famous scholars. We mentioned one, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. We can mention like Abul Yusr al-Pazdawi, died 493 after the Hijrah. So just remember, al-Maturidi died 333 after the Hijrah, and he has a direct link back to Imam Abu Hanifa. I'll try and mention that direct link later on if I get time. Abu Mu'ayn al-Nasafi died 508 after the Hijrah. So he's going century after century approximately. Al-Safar al-Bukhari died 533 after the Hijrah. And more famously, even common people, common folk, and especially those who have studied in the madrasas would have heard of this name, Imam Najmuddin Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, who has a famous creed, Al-Aqidat al-Nasafiyya, which is studied in some madrasas, and there's many commentaries to it as well, which I'll try and mention later on if there's time. So first and foremost, I've mentioned the formation of the Hanafi theological tradition. How did it arise? And we're talking about Imam Abu Hanifa and his direct contribution in defending the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah and systematically mentioning the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and what are the works attributed to him which mention all of this as well. So Imam Abu Hanifa's theological considerations are documented in some works that have been ascribed to him and reached our time. They've reached our time either in manuscript format or printed format. So two short treatises in the discipline of theology have been transmitted on his authority. So one of these two works, a Risala, a short work, a Risala, is addressed to a certain person called Uthman al-Batti. Now there is actually two Risalas. Imam ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great muhaddith, he mentioned in his book Tahzib al-Tahzib, this Uthman al-Batti was a narrator of hadith and he was a contemporary to Imam Abu Hanifa. So this one, we can say, the shorter version, we can call it Risala number 1. This was published around 1949. It's entitled Risala ila Uthman al-Batti, like a letter or a formal document to Uthman al-Batti answering some queries. The second one, the second epistle, not many people know of this one. By contrast to the first one, it raises a number of serious questions. So it's more in depth. And this one is preserved in a unique but incomplete manuscript. It's only been discovered lately, I'm talking about. And it's been discovered as in recent times, and it's available under the title Risala li Abi Hanifa and Nu'man bin Thabit al-Kufi ila Uthman al-Batti. And this manuscript is found in Tehran, the capital of Iran, in the Majlis Library, the Parliament in Iran, which is obviously now a Shia state. But remember, historically, Iran was a Sunni state for hundreds of years. And as I said before, northeastern Iran is what's known as Khurasan, a Farsi-speaking territory. So there were Hanafi scholars in that area and Shafis as well. And there's famous seats of learning in Iran prior to the Shia takeover, let's say. I'm talking about cities like Nishapur or Nisabur, as they say in Arabic, or Isfahan or Asbahan or Isbahan in Arabic. So some of the literature from the early Hanafis and Shafis still present there in Iran in manuscript format and have still not been published today. A lot of these manuscripts have been digitized and they're available online on some websites to download freely, I'm talking about. But it's very tedious, page by page. Most of the time you have to see them page by page and save them page by page. Some of them you can download as complete PDFs. So both epistles are informative in terms of their arguments and their doctrinal stances. So they talk about Aqidah in both of these Risalas we're talking about. So Risala number 1, which is available as in print, deals mainly with the topic of belief and sin. About belief and sin, or rather the position of believers and sinners. And while discussing these issues, just to give you a summary, Imam Abu Hanifa made a few interesting statements. And I'm talking about Risala number 1, which is available. You can find it online as well. I don't think it's been translated into English. The main arguments of the second Risala text include that Allah has created all people and has shown all people, not only Muslims, the way to obedience. So Allah has set up proofs through revelations and so on. By doing so, He gave them responsibility for their deeds, or as the text puts it, He enjoined the argument hujjah upon them. And later on, we know obviously Allah revealed the Quran as the final revelation, as a final proof, and Allah has also constituted limbs of humans such that they function both as the means by which they act, ya'maluna, and the basis upon which they can be brought to reckoning, yuhasibuna wa yas'aluna. However, nothing can be done by humans and nothing can occur in this world unless Allah Himself wills it. So I'm just giving a summary of this manuscript, Risala number 2. Now if a human being intends something good, then Allah lets it happen with His power and His divine assistance, tawfiq, and rewards him for it, and so on. So a number of issues like this detailed issues have been mentioned and attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa in this Risala number 2. But as I've said, unfortunately, this Risala is not been published, it's incomplete, and some scholars doubt its authenticity to Imam Abu Hanifa. Whatever the case may be, it should hopefully be published and edited and more analysis done to show if it truly is from Abu Hanifa or not. Now, we mentioned Kufa already, the previous speakers mentioned Kufa. Scholars went to Kufa. People came to Kufa to take from Imam Abu Hanifa and his disciples. Scholars went to Kufa in Iraq to study with Imam Abu Hanifa, and as a result his theological concepts, meaning those things to do with doctrine or Aqidah, spread widely. Where did I say? Northeast Iran, Khorasan. So these people visited and took away these issues of fiqh and Aqidah from the likes of Abu Hanifa and his students. And in Transoxania, as I've said mentioned already, which by the end of the second century, it became the new homeland of the Hanafi theological tradition. So there was a migration of, I'm talking especially about creedal issues, from Kufa towards this new territory, which is Farsi-speaking territory, like as I've said, Uzbekistan, and so on. And this became the homeland for the Hanafi school for centuries after that. Now, some of the scholars who contributed to this spread, in particular in Kufa, as I've said before, Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, but there were others prior to his age as well. So we're talking about those who visited Kufa and then took it to these new homelands. One of them is Imam Abu Muqatil al-Samarkandi. So he was from Samarkand, Uzbekistan. He died 208 after the Hijrah. And another person who also studied under Imam Abu Hanifa, his name is Abu Muti al-Balkhi. And he's actually someone who's compiled a work in the name of Abu Hanifa, which we'll mention soon. Both of them wrote important treatises which spread the doctrinal ideas of the Hanafi school and the spread of Sunni Islam at large. So these two authors. Abu Muqatil al-Samarkandi is the author of a book called Kitab al-Alim wal-Muta'allim. This has been published in the last century, talking about the last Islamic century, and edited by the late Shaykh Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari, died in the 1950s. Abu Muti, he compiled a work that's known as Al-Fiqh al-Absat. So this has also reached us, it's been published for some time. The Kitab al-Alim wal-Muta'allim has the form of a discussion between a master and his teacher. And the teacher is Imam Abu Hanifa, and most likely the pupil is Abu Muqatil himself. Now, in the course of their conversation in this book, Kitab al-Alim I'm talking about, they touch upon several themes, several issues, which have already been dealt with in the first epistle, Risala number 1. So some of these issues, they have already been discussed in the Risala to Uthman al-Batti, Risala number 1 I'm talking about. And Imam Abu Hanifa explains his definition of Iman again, belief. And the concept that judgment about believing sinners should be left solely to Allah. So Kitab al-Alim wal-Muta'allim is more intricate. The scholars have said it's more detailed, more intricate in nature, the theological issues discussed in the than Risala number 1. And the Fiqh al-Absat by Abu Muti al-Balkhi is less coherent in structure. And one or two things in there some people misuse as well to try and promote their understanding of certain points to do more so with the attributes of Allah, the sifat of Allah, which we're not going to go into today. And the treatise, this book, Al-Fiqh al-Absat, elaborates on topics which have already been touched upon in the Kitab al-Alim wal-Muta'allim. So these are to reiterate what's the commonality between these two: definition of belief, what is Iman, the reward in the afterlife, postponement of the judgment about believing sinners, and the assertion of a middle way between determinism and free will. So some complicated issues have been tackled in these works as well, which is not for the average Joe to go into. It's really for the scholarly class to go into, and commentaries have been written on these passages as well. And I'm going to try and mention some of these works later if I get time. So apart from that, the two texts presents the principles of commanding right and forbidding evil, al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar, and the question of the divine attributes which I've already hinted, the sifat of Allah. Now we may mention some other works as well that have been attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa, but let's go into a bit more history about this region, the region of Central Asia. The Samanid rulers, named after Saman Khuda, they were the governors of Khorasan, this Farsi-speaking territory, Transoxania, which I've mentioned. They adopted this creed as espoused by the local Hanafi scholars who, as I said before their time, they went to Kufa and inherited the teachings of Abu Hanifa and his students and then took it away to those regions. And they made it the official doctrine in the 4th century. The Samanid rulers made the theology of Imam Abu Hanifa as the official doctrine in that region. So one of them, at that time, one of the rulers ordered a Hanafi scholar known as Al-Hakim al-Samarkandi, who died in 342 after the Hijrah, to summarize the principles of faith in a concise format, in a simplistic format, not too detailed. So Al-Hakim, he composed a work called Al-Rad ala Ashab al-Ahwa. What does that mean? Some people will find it unusual. Al-Rad ala Ashab al-Ahwa, I mean like a refutation of the companions who follow their desires when it comes to what? Creedal issues, theological issues, meaning deviants who had their own methodology, ideology, and misinterpretation of the creed from earliest times. So by name, those people were tackled, those sects were tackled. And this book actually, there's a more famous title, and some of the ulama have heard of, and I do believe someone is actually working on it now, using manuscript. But it's been studied on before as well. I mentioned something. Kitab As-Sawad al-Azam ala Madhab al-Imam Abu Hanifa. The book on the great mass of believers upon the way of Imam Abu Hanifa, or the Madhab of Abu Hanifa. This work was written in Arabic but then translated into Farsi, and a study has been done in English as well. In the 1970s, a PhD was done in the UK on this work, but I do now believe someone I think it's in America, someone is actually working on this work, a new edition of this work. So this is a work, Al-Hakim al-Samarkandi, who lived at the same time as Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, that's reached our time and has been published as well in various languages. The points of creed and convictions include, in this work I'm talking about Iman, the situation of the sinner, free will and predestination, the judgment about the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, eschatology that I mentioned earlier. Eschatology, some of you probably never heard of eschatology, Eschatology. What is that? Signs before the Day of Judgment, if you want to call it that. Things that occur before the Day of Judgment and things in the hereafter. This they call eschatology. And Westerners, Orientalists are very into eschatology, especially with the rise of groups in Syria and Iraq, like ISIS and so on, and using certain hadith to say, we were foretold to come and conquer these regions and so on. This is called eschatology. Promise and threat in the afterlife, the community, Jama'ah, meaning the way of the Sahaba, the Quran, as well as some points about Allah and His attributes. So all of this is in the book Kitab As-Sawad al-Azam. And secondly, going into the Hanafi theology as transmitted by Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So Imam al-Maturidi died 333 after the Hijrah, as I mentioned. He took the Hanafi madhab from a person known as Imam Abu Bakr al-Juzjani. So I'll give you the link back to Imam Abu Hanifa. The previous speaker, he mentioned something about the links of Abu Hanifa to those who came before him. How did he link himself back to the Prophet ﷺ? The companions we're talking about. What was his link back to, say, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? Imam al-Maturidi also had a direct link, or several links back to the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa and his students. So this is one link we'll mention. Imam al-Maturidi, he took the Hanafi school, talking about the school itself, the fiqh, and the creed from Imam Abu Bakr al-Juzjani, who took it from Imam Abu Sulaiman Musa bin Sulaiman al-Juzjani, who took it from Imam Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani. And you heard the name before, in the last session, Kitab al-Asr you heard today, who took it from Imam Abu Hanifa. So this is one way of knowing if the true creed has reached us. We have to examine the chains of transmission and see who's in the chains of transmission, and have the people who in the chains of transmission been validated to have the true understanding that was transmitted by the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa and his disciples or not. Or were there people who tried to misinterpret and pass on the Hanafi theological tradition in the name of Abu Hanifa or not as well? As may be the case, as I said, with the Mu'tazilites. And even in our time, some people say we are following the creed of Abu Hanifa, and you see some of them refer to a certain commentary on Tahawiyah, and they say this is the true understanding of Imam Abu Hanifa. We get some people like that throughout the world, the Muslim world. They use a commentary by a person called Ibn Abil Iz al-Hanafi. Just because he's Hanafi doesn't mean he's got the Aqeedah of Imam Abu Hanifa, as I've said. He might be Hanafi in terms of his fiqh, but in terms of his creed, he may not represent or adhere to the true way of Imam Abu Hanifa when it comes to creed. And that can be applied to the other Imams, the other madhabs as well. The Shafi'i madhab, the Maliki madhab, the Hanbali madhab. We'll find that as well. Some people only follow the fiqh of those Imams. But in terms of their creed, if you examine it carefully, sometimes they don't actually link themselves to the true teachings of those masters who began the madhabs or initiated the madhabs. So Al-Hakim al-Samarkandi, he composed his creed. The more well-known representative of the Hanafi creed was presented, documented by Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So al-Maturidi was more famous and he had more contribution as well, academic contribution that I mentioned. And at that time as well, just before Al-Maturidi, there was actually another person who was one of the teachers of Al-Maturidi who also spread the teachings of Abu Hanifa, or the Hanafi theological tradition. His name was Abu Nasr al-Iyadi, died around 277 after the Hijrah. And he was one of the teachers of Al-Maturidi, as I just said. But we can also mention that there were actually two ways of understanding the creed in early times, the Hanafi theological tradition, as I've just said. So again, recently a manuscript has been discovered in Turkey, in Istanbul, the Shahid Ali Pasha manuscript library in Istanbul, and there is a work called Jumal Usuluddin by Imam Abu Salama al-Samarkandi. And within this, just to mention, according to this work, there were two different Hanafi strands existing in the 3rd century Samarkand. In 3rd century Samarkand, in this work, one being Kalam oriented, what's known as Ilmul Kalam, or scholastic theology, involving some form of formal argumentation, okay, leaning and represented by scholars like Abu Sulaiman al-Juzjani. So these were the Kalam scholars that linked to the Hanafi tradition. Abu Sulaiman al-Juzjani and Abu Nasr al-Iyadi, the teacher of Al-Maturid that just mentioned. And the other one, they were against Kalam. They were against Ilmul Kalam. And they were represented by traditional scholars like Abu Bakr and Abu Ahmed al-Iyadi. And these two are actually the sons of Abu Nasr al-Iyadi. And Al-Hakim al-Samarkandi was one of those traditional scholars. So they didn't like Ilmul Kalam. So you can get that as well in other madhabs as well. In the Shafi school you'll find that as well. Traditionalist and Kalamic. So we're not going to go into that. And there's a debate over the use of Kalam, when it can be used and when it shouldn't be used and so on. So Al-Maturidi, we've already mentioned he was from Samarkand. But when he was born, we don't know. Some say 257 after the Hijrah, just to give an idea. And I already mentioned he died in 333. But he composed a number of works. Just to give you some examples, on theology, Aqidah-related matters, on Quranic exegesis, or polemics against the Mu'tazilites, refutations against the Mu'tazilite sect. We have his works like Bayan, Waham al-Mu'tazila, Rad al-Usul al-Khamsa, Rad Awa'il al-Adilla lil-Ka'bi, Rad Kitab al-Ka'bi, and against the Shia as well at that time, Rad Kitab al-Imama li Ba'd al-Rawafid, Heresiography, Kitab al-Maqalat. If you remember, I mentioned Imam Abu Hanifa's contribution, we can say threefold, at least threefold I mentioned today: soteriology, heresiology, and eschatology, S-H-E. Just remember S-H-E, she. So these Imams, they were not shy to deal with these topics when there was a need to. Unlike, sadly today, some of the ulama, they're frightened to talk about these matters. They say it creates tension, fitna, disunity, and so on. But if we're really following the early school of Imam Abu Hanifa, they were ready to tackle these types of fitan, mischievous groups and sects and ideologies and methodology if they arose in their vicinity or even far away. And naming and shaming individuals as well by name. For example, Jahm ibn Safwan, the person who denied the attributes of Allah. Imam al-Zahabi mentioned in his book Sir A'lam al-Nubala that Imam Abu Hanifa said that two depraved opinions have reached us. One from Jahm bin Safwan, the nullifier of the divine attributes, and the other one from Muqatil, the one who made Allah resemble his creation. So this person, Muqatil, he's actually got a tafsir which has been printed in our time as well and spread by people as well in our time. And you examine some of it and you'll see Imam Abu Hanifa's judgment was correct. So they actually named people when there was a need. And this was the way of those early Imams. All four Imams, you'll find examples, Malik, and the person who came and asked him about what's the meaning of istiwa. Ash-Shafi'i, he tackled issues to do with creed as well. Imam Ahmed especially as well. So that was the way of those Imams. They weren't frightened or shy when there was a need to defend the teachings of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, defend true traditional Sunni Islam. They did so. Okay, so now obviously it's not for everyone. It's for the specialists to do. Not for the youth on the streets or through social media platforms to do. It's for the qualified elite scholars to do. Okay. Now Imam al-Maturidi, most of his works have not reached our time, but two have. One of them being his comprehensive commentary on the Quran, Ta'wilatul Quran, or published under the title Ta'wilat Ahlus Sunnah. Now there's about 3 different editions I've seen on the market, all 3 available online as PDFs. One I've seen 5 volumes, one is a 10-volume edition, and probably the best edition is in 18 volumes with editing, with footnotes and so on. So all of these editions are available online. So this work, you can find there's more than 30 manuscripts available, this commentary to the Quran, which shows that a lot of scholars paid attention to it. Paid attention to it through the centuries. especially in the Ottoman period, the last caliphate, the last valid caliphate we're talking about, not these nonsense groups claiming to be caliphs here and there, dying off after a few years. We're talking about established for hundreds of years with a chain going back to the Salafus Salihin, and also rightly guided scholars amongst them as well, and attaining titles like Shaykh al-Islam and so on. You will see they paid a lot of attention to this commentary of the Quran, Ta'wilat Ahl Sunnah, and another work called Kitab al-Tawheed, to do with the oneness of Allah. And there's only one manuscript of this work available. So this was not widespread, and surprisingly, this one manuscript survives in our time in the UK, in Cambridge University. You can find it online, you can flick page by page, and you can save as page by page as well. I've got a link to, if anyone wants to see it, you can come and take the link later. I'm talking about the URL, the actual internet link. So this work, Kitab al-Tawheed, it has been published back in 1970, and more recently, about 15 years ago, 2003. Now, another work, and I'm sure people have heard of this, more famous, is Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa. Why I say attributed? Because there has been debate in the past, and maybe even today, contemporaries are saying it's not proven to be from Imam Abu Hanifa, but we will show that majority do actually affirm it's from Imam Abu Hanifa, and we'll give some quotations soon. So there are actually two works going by the title Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, and this title, it shouldn't be misinterpreted that it means it's a work on jurisprudence, al-fiqh. It's more to do with understanding, the greatest understanding, to do with what theological questions, rather than Islamic law, what's halal and haram and makruh and mandub and mustahab and so on. It's not to do with that. It's to do with the greatest understanding that a believer can have, is what? To do with creedal issues. So creed comes first. For a Muslim, the first thing we say is the shahada. So this creedal issue, that's more important than what we learn later on, meaning fiqh issues. Our creed is more important, must be understood correctly, and then other things follow. So Al-Fiqh al-Akbar 1, and there's a longer edition called Al-Fiqh al-Akbar 2, we can call it. Al-Fiqh al-Akbar 1 is shorter, as I've said, and there's a commentary attributed to Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi as well. And some manuscripts say this is commentary, Sharh al-Fiqh al-Akbar is by al-Maturidi, but other scholars have said no, it's not actually by al-Maturidi, it's by another Hanafi scholar from the 4th century, a younger contemporary to al-Maturidi, called Imam Abu al-Samarkandi, died about 373 after the Hijrah. He was very famous within the Hanafi tradition, especially for fiqh issues as well. Some of his works have been published in recent decades. Al-Fiqh al-Akbar 2, as I said, the longer version, we have a commentary to it by the famous Hanafi scholar Mullah Ali al-Qari, died 1014 after the Hijrah. And so he has used Al-Fiqh al-Akbar number 2, as I've said. And there is an English commentary available by our first speaker, Shaykh Abdul Rahman Mangira, who was here earlier on. He's published it under the title Imam Abu Hanifa's Al-Fiqh al-Akbar Explained. He's used the commentary to Fiqh al-Akbar number 2 by Imam Abu al-Muntaha al-Maghnisawi, and selection from the commentary of Imam Ali al-Qari. So let me just mention some things that is mentioned here, and I think the book is available on sale, I've seen it as well today. Just to quote from this work by Mufti Abdul Rahman, page 24, he says, the Ottoman scholar Maghnisawi writes, the treatise Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, which the great Imam authored, meaning Abu Hanifa, is a reliable and accepted work. Ali al-Qari, the hadith scholar, theologian and jurist, writes in his commentary, the great Imam, the magnanimous, the great honourable exemplifier of mankind, Abu Hanifa of Kufa, may Allah have mercy upon him, stated in his work called Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. And then further, the index and bookseller of the 4th century, Ibn al-Nadim, states in his Kitab al-Fihrist, which was compiled in 377 after the Hijrah, meaning Abu Hanifa's works are the books Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, Al-Risala, the epistle to Uthman al-Batti, Al-Alim wal-Muta'allim, and a few lines later, Mufti Abdul Rahman mentioned, the Imam Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi writes, the first of the theologians from amongst the jurists and leaders of the schools were Abu Hanifa and Ash-Shafi'i. So they, from the 2nd century, especially in the early part of the 2nd century, Imam Abu Hanifa was one of the first people to contribute to a formal theological explanation and promulgation of the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. For indeed Abu Hanifa composed a treatise in the rebuttal of the Qadariyah called Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. So Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi is actually a heresiologist, an expert on the deviant sects that arose in early time, 4th century, Al-Farq Bain al-Firq. So he's saying this book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar is actually compiled to refute a deviant sect called Al-Qadariyah. And then he says further on, Imam Abu Muzaffar al-Isfara'i, a Shafi scholar, states in his Al-Tabsir fi Din, Abu Hanifa's Al-Alim wal-Muta'allim contains conclusive proofs against the people of heresy and innovation. So I've said earlier, these Imams, they weren't shy. If there was deviant people out there, they were ready to tackle them and refute them by name as well. And the book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar that has been related to us by a reliable authority through a transmission from Hussain bin Yahya from Abu Hanifa. So there is actually a chain for this as well. Shaykh Wahbi Ghawaj, one of our teachers, died in 2013. He was a master of Aqidah from Albania. He resided in Damascus. He edited the commentary to Fiqh al-Akbar by Imam Ali al-Qari. Shaykh Wahbi Ghawaj, after quoting his Quranic statement, says, I saw an excellent manuscript of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar in the library of Shaykh al-Islam, Arif Hikmat. So this library is in Medina actually. No longer available, it's not longer around, but the manuscripts within this library have been transferred to one of the Saudi universities in Medina. In the illuminated city of Medina, may there be 1,000 blessings and peace upon its inhabitants, which was from the transmission of, so there is a chain of transmission, Shaykh Wahbi saw on this manuscript of Fiqh al-Akbar, Ali bin Ahmed al-Farisi, from Nusayr bin Yahya, from Abu Muqatil, from Isam bin Yusuf, from Hamad, the son of Abu Hanifa, not to be confused with Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman that you heard earlier, but Hamad was also the son of Abu Hanifa. This confirms the attribution of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar to the Imam. So this is a proof to show that Shaykh Wahbi saw a manuscript in Medina in the Shaykh al-Islam Arif Hikmat collection, and most of that's been digitized now as well. Some of it's available online, but I couldn't find this work online. It's still probably in Medina somewhere, in digital format probably, with that chain. And Mufti Abdul Rahman also mentioned another famous scholar from Pakistan who died in 2009, Sheikh Muhammad Sarfraz Khan Safdar, died in 2009. The Allama Tash Kubrizada writes that Imam Abu Hanifa has discussed most aspects of the science of Kalam in his book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar and Al-Alim wal-Muta'allim. As for the assertion that these two works are not authored by Imam Abu Hanifa, but by Abu Hanifa al-Bukhari, meaning someone else, this is a mere fabrication of the Mu'tazila, who were under the false impression that Imam Abu Hanifa was one of their supporters. Allama Hafiz al-Din al-Bazzazi writes in his book Manaqib Abi Hanifa that he personally saw the two books Al-Fiqh al-Akbar and Al-Alim wal-Muta'allim written in the handwriting of Shamsuddin al-Kardari al-Baratakini al-Imadi, who in turn stated that they were authored by the Imam. And a large group of scholars have also affirmed Imam Abu Hanifa as being the author of these two works. Among them, Imam Fakhrul Islam Bazdawi, in whose book Al-Usul this agreement is mentioned. Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Bukhari also affirms their authorship in his commentary about Al-Usul. So I'm just going to quickly finish off by mentioning, because time is short, there are other works. Another one that's attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa is Kitab al-Wasiyya. The work has been published with the Sharh of Mullah Hussain ibn Iskandar al-Hanafi in Hyderabad, India in 1321. So more than a century ago. And it was written to his student Yusuf bin Khalid as-Samti. And another representative we can mention, a very famous representative, I'm sure more people have heard of this name than al-Maturidi, another representative of the true teachings of Imam Abu Hanifa when it comes to not just fiqh but creedal issues is the famous Imam Abu Ja'far at-Tahawi, who lived between 239 and 321 after the Hijrah, but he wasn't from northeast Iran or Khorasan or Central Asia. He was from Egypt, and his creed is famous, and there's translations available and many commentaries available to it as well. This text has reached us through various chains of transmission as well. I don't have time to mention the chains, but it goes back to three students of Imam at-Tahawi. One of them, Abu Bakr al-Mukri, who's a scholar of Hadith, and Muhammad ibn al-Muzaffar, and Ahmed bin Muhammad ibn Mansur. These are the students who transmit directly from at-Tahawi. We mentioned the chain going back from Imam al-Maturidi back to Abu Hanifa. We mentioned a chain going back to Fiqh al-Akbar through the route of Hamad, the son of Abu Hanifa. And I wanted to mention some other thing just about Tahawi's creed that is acceptable to all four madhabs as well. We'll mention one famous scholar, not from the Hanafi school, Imam Tajuddin al-Subki. He's mentioned in his book Mu'id al-Niyam that, and these Hanafis, Shafis, Malikis, and the virtuous ones from the Hanbalis, virtuous one, he says al-Fudala al-Hanabila. Why? Because there were some people who were not truly following the Hanbali creed as well. So he's very selective in the language he's used. In beliefs, aqaid are with one hand upon the view of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They profess in Allah the Almighty upon the path of the Shaykh as-Sunnah, Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, may Allah have mercy upon him. So this is another Imam who codified the doctrine of Ahl Sunnah. I mentioned him before, the Ash'ari school. Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari lived at the same time as Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, and al-Tahawi was also contemporary to them. All three lived at the same time, but I don't know if they ever met each other. All of them have contribution to Aqidah-related issues. And again, Tajuddin as-Subki mentioned the same work. He goes, in summation, the creed of al-Ash'ari is what's contained in the creed of Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi. So there's a lot of commonality between the schools. The differences between the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, and a few subsidiary, secondary issues to do with scholastics and so on, which the scholars of the various madhabs have endorsed and are content with. Meaning all four madhabs have endorsed the creed of al-Tahawi, and they've written commentaries to it. And I was going to mention a list of these titles, but time is short. And coming to the end, because time for Asr is coming up, just mention the definition of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We mentioned the history of Imam Abu Hanifa and those who came closest to his time, and their contribution and their defense and promulgation of the true Sunni Orthodox creed. What is the definition of Ahl Sunnah? Many people like to hijack that term and say, we're Sunni, we're Ahl Sunnah, you're Ahlul Bidah, meaning you're innovators and so on. Just to mention, Imam Ibn Hajar al-Haytami from the 10th century, he mentions in his book, Fatawa al-Hadithiyah, he mentions that one who is against what the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are upon, and what's meant by them are the followers of Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari and Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, the two Imams of Ahl Sunnah. So this is one of the recognized definitions of what is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Imam Shihabuddin al-Kalyubi, another Shafi scholar, he mentions in his Kanzul Raghibin, one who departs from what Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi reported is not considered to be a Sunni. So these days, the youth are talking and saying, we are Sunni, we follow the Salaf, and everyone else is on innovation. They are the ones who are not following the classical tradition. These are quotes from famous Imams who followed the classical tradition and have links going back to the Salafus Salihin. These two Imams, they followed the footprints of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba. And we mentioned Al-Hanbali, Allama Abdul Baqi, Al-Mawahib Al-Hanbali in his Al-Ain Al-Wathar. The groups of Ahl Sunnah are three: Ash'aris, Hanbalis and Maturidis. So all three he recognized. And this is someone from the 11th century. There's another Hanbali we can mention, Shaykh Muhammad al-Safirini al-Hanbali in Lawamil al-Anwar. He mentioned Ahl Sunnah consists of three groups: the Atharis, the textualists, whose Imam is Ahmed ibn Hanbal; the Ash'aris, whose Imam is Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari; and the Maturidis, whose Imam is Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. And they are all one sect, the same sect, and they are Ahlul Hadith. And notice he's not mentioned something called the Salafi sect or As-Salafiyah. It was unknown. It's a new coinage, we can say, a new term. And we can mention other Imams, like Imam Murtada al-Zabidi, he's a student of As-Safarini as well. But I will content myself to stop there. There was far more I wanted to say. It'll probably take another 45 minutes.